This week we're going to learn about money, the functions of money, and the money market. So the first question is, what is money? What makes something acceptable as money? And what gets used as money? Sorry, excuse me. So what is money? This is a very complicated question. It sounds really easy because we all know what money is and we see it and we use it. But basically, it's just anything that's a representation of value that can be exchanged for goods and services. So what makes something acceptable as money? Well, it's kind of complicated, right? To make something acceptable as money, it has to be scarce so that it has value. It has to be something that people trust in. It has to be something that's divisible so you can make change. It has to be something that's portable. So there are a number of characteristics. And the functions of money will be on the next screen. So first, I guess it's what makes something work as money on the next screen. So in order to work as money, an item needs to be portable, which means you can carry it with you. Uniform, which means that one penny is the same as another penny, $1 is the same as another dollar. Divisible, as I said, it means I can pay you $1 for something that costs 50 cents and you can give me change. It has to be durable, so it wouldn't work to have literally paper money because if it went in the washing machine it would fall apart. And it has to be acceptable or stable in value. So in other words, people in the society assign it a particular value and they expect it to stay relatively stable, although we know inflation can actually erode the value a little bit. So in class we often talk about these different items and whether they would work well, and obviously some of them work well and some of them don't. And historically many of these items were used as money. Salt was a particularly good one. Gold as well, because they could be made into small units. They could be easily divisible. They could be weighed. They were durable. And also they were goods that people wanted. Beaver pelts worked in the early United States, cigarettes worked in prison, etc. So cattle were used, but they're very, very difficult to use as money because, well, they don't live forever and they're not easily divisible. If you chop it up, then you cannot get it back. The functions of money, there are three primary functions of money. The first one is medium of exchange. And medium of exchange means that it is something that can facilitate trade. So you can trade a dollar bill for a cup of coffee, or you can trade a cup of coffee for a dollar bill. So it helps facilitate trade. And one of the benefits of having money is that we don't have to use a barter system, right? Where when there's a barter system, in order for a trade to be effective, we have to have what's called a double coincidence of wants. In other words, I want what you have, I have what you want. So let's say I wanted to buy a new phone and I had a lawnmower I was willing to get rid of. You know, I'd have to look for somebody who wanted a lawnmower and had a phone. So that'd be it would have a lot of transaction costs. It'd be very difficult to execute that trade. So money serves as a medium of exchange, and that means that I can sell my lawnmower for money and use that cash to buy the phone that I want. So that's medium of exchange. The second one is unit of account, and that means that it helps us track the value of things. So this becomes most clear if you go to a different country and you don't understand their money system. So you go to, let's say, China, and you have yuan, and you really don't understand how much each yuan is worth. So something is priced at 500 yuan, and you have no idea, is that a good price, is that a bad price? So unit of account sort of functions as our internal accounting system and helps us judge prices. And then third is store of value. So if I have $100, I expect that to be worth something 6 months from now, 12 months from now. I know it might lose a little bit of value, as I said, because of inflation. But essentially, I expect money to store value just like I expect, you know, a house or gold, jewelry to store value. But those don't work very well as medium of exchange or unit of account. So it has to fit all three of those functions to work well as money. Money can have value from different sources. It's important to know what each of these means. So inherent value means that whatever the money itself is actually has some value. So for example, when people used salt, right, as money, or people used beaver pelts or beads, right? Those things, people actually valued those. People valued salt because you need salt in your diet, and people were always on a quest for salt for much of human history. So salt has inherent value to people, and you can hang on to the salt and you can trade it, but the salt itself is worth something. Representative value is more like if you have, let's say, early money had representative value because early money represented something with inherent value like gold. So gold had value to people. It could be used in jewelry or whatever, decorating things. And dollars represented gold, which had value, so dollars had representative value. But dollars no longer have representative value. Now they have what we call fiat value, which means our dollars have value because the government says they have value. So fiat is like a decree from a dictator or a king. You know, this has value. That's fiat value, and that is the only kind of value that our currency currently has. Okay, so how do we measure this thing we call the money supply? What is the money supply? The money supply is measured by the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve you've learned about and you're going to learn a little bit more about next week. The Fed measures and tracks the money supply, and the Fed influences increases or decreases in the money supply. Banks and savings and loans and credit unions all have to report the value of what people have in their checking accounts, savings accounts, and time accounts, which are like certificates of deposit. And the Fed defines certain kinds of money based on whether they are a medium of exchange primarily or a store of value primarily. So we have two definitions here of money. M1 is the narrowest definition and the narrowest measure of the money supply. M1 includes currency, meaning dollar bills, coins, so anything, you know, quarters, dollar coins, pennies, nickels, dimes. M1 is all of those things, and it's also all of the money that is in people's checking accounts, or what we also call those demand deposits, so meaning it's in spendable form right away. You don't have to take money out of a checking account in order to spend it. You can spend it straight from the checking account. And then also traveler's checks, which are really only about 1% of the money supply, and they are a particular form of check that's printed by some companies. Visa does them, American Express, and you can spend them in other countries. So you could also spend possibly dollars in other countries, but most other countries, if you try to write a check, right, no one's going to accept it. So traveler's checks are a specific kind that involves a serial number and a double signature to verify them. So M1 is any kind of money that is what we call liquid, which means spendable. Okay, liquid assets, money you can spend right now. You don't have to go to the bank. You don't have to sell something. You don't have to convert it. So I have not updated this. Hopefully in our stats page we have this. In 2010, 1.71 trillion was M1. Okay, but I do not have the updated figures here. M2 is a slightly broader definition of money. And when you think about M2, it's really important to realize that M1 is contained within M2. So M2 is a broader measure, but it is not a separate measure. M2 includes all of M1 and money that's in savings accounts, time deposits, certificates of deposit, that means money market deposit accounts, and other non-institutional money market funds. And the key here is that money that's in M2 is less liquid. You, theoretically anyway, cannot spend money that's in your savings account. You actually have to take the money out of the bank or transfer it to your checking account before you can spend it. And you can see M2 is quite a bit larger. People have a lot of money that's not actually in spendable form. If they did convert it all to spendable form, it's likely we'd have inflation. There used to be something called M3. It hasn't been measured since 2006, and it was significantly larger than M2. Okay, and M3 is large time deposits, meaning money that's set aside for, say, 10 years. Right? It's a very long time and a very large amount of money. Okay, there's also a concept, the monetary base, and this is basically the money that exists in banks that can be converted to money and withdrawn by the public. And you can see the monetary base has grown over time, but in the most recent recession, the Fed really expanded the monetary base. They pushed a lot of available resources for lending out to banks. Banks didn't lend most of it. Banks held on to a lot of it, or invested in other ways. So it didn't really grow the money supply, but what grew was what we just call the monetary base, or the potential money. Okay, just to be clear, what's not money? Any asset that doesn't fit the medium of exchange is not money. So gold is not money. Okay, houses, jewelry, collectible items, none of those things are money. It doesn't mean they couldn't work as money, but we don't call them money right now because they do not. You cannot go to Target and spend them. You can't go to Target and say, I'll trade my jewelry for that vacuum cleaner. It just doesn't work. Credit cards are also not money, and this is a little bit confusing. One thing I'll say is just memorize that. Credit cards are not money, but the reason why is a little bit complicated, and the main reason, or the best explanation I can give, is that credit cards are potential money. So you have a balance on your credit card, which is what you spent, and then you have available funds, and it's not really money. It's if you spend it, then a transaction has happened, and you're essentially borrowing money. But we couldn't really measure the money on credit cards, the unused balances, because it would be impossible to quantify them. There's no way to know how much unspent money people have that they could potentially spend from their credit cards. So we don't really know about that money until it's actually spent. And by that time, it's taken a different form. Okay, so economists have two different graphs they use to consider basically interest rates and money. And we're just going to do one of them today to keep it a little bit simpler. And this one is called the money market. This is the more traditional one. So the y-axis, you can't quite see it on the left graph, says rate of interest. Okay, you can see it on the middle graph here. All of these are rate of interest. And we're going to say that this is the nominal interest rate, okay, and that a different graph is going to show us the real interest rate. So the nominal interest rate, okay, for all of these, this is the nominal interest rate, meaning it's the interest rate in current terms. It's not been adjusted for inflation. The demand for money can be broken into two things. The transactions demand for money, which is based on the GDP, or how much people are buying and selling. And there's the asset demand for money, and that is based on how much money people want to keep as cash as opposed to how much they want to keep in accounts. And if you look at this graph, the asset demand for money is like any demand curve. It's downward sloping, which means that at higher interest rates, people want basically no cash because they want to keep their money in a savings account earning interest. But at lower interest rates, people want lots of cash. Okay, so the asset demand for money tells us how much do people want in spendable form. Not how much money do you want to have overall. Obviously, people want to have lots of money. But this is how much they want as cash. And we add those together horizontally. So at an interest rate of 7.5%, we have a $100 billion transactions demand for money. And we have a, let's see here, $50 billion asset demand for money. So we have a total at 7.5 of $150 billion. So we just add these two graphs together, and that gives us the total demand for money. The supply of money is a vertical line. You'll see it on the last graph. And that's because the supply of money is determined by the Fed. And it is independent of other factors. It's what the Fed decides it's going to be. Or at least more or less. They don't have that much power. So you can see here different potential amounts of money in the society or in the economy based on the intersection of people's demand for money, right? This is what people want, and the Fed's supply of money. So if the Fed starts out here, oops, I didn't mean to do that. The Fed starts out here and people's demand for money is there, right? Then we will end up with an interest rate of 5%. Because the Fed has decided the money supply will be 200, and therefore, based on people's actions, the interest rate will be at 5%. If the Fed decides to increase the money supply, okay, which we'll talk more about how they can do that. If they increase the money supply, that will actually automatically lead to a decrease in the interest rate. Because at the old interest rate, there will now be a surplus. There will be more money in supply than people want. So what will happen at that lower interest rate? Okay, what will happen is the interest rate will actually drop as a result of the fact that people won't demand that much. Or will demand more, I should say. People will demand more cash at that lower interest rate. If the Fed decides to decrease the money supply, then what will happen is there will be actually a shortage of money, right? With a smaller money supply at the existing interest rate, right? There will be too many people who want that money, and so what will happen is that'll drive the interest rate up to 7.5%. So the Fed's actions on the size of the money supply will influence the interest rate. And I think I'm going to cut this video off here and have a little second one because I don't think 1 minute's going to be enough to finish it off.